Welcome to Rise and Rouse, a podcast for people who give a damn. Thanks for listening. I appreciate every single one of you. This is your host, Erin Allgood, social impact strategist, consultant, and someone who cultivates deep and loving relationships. This week on Rise and Rouse, you'll hear my conversation with Nguyen, one of my dearest friends and someone that I love more than words can adequately express. Bao is the shopkeeper at Phin, a Vietnamese coffee shop in the Little Saigon neighborhood in Seattle, where he practices heart-centered entrepreneurship, builds community, inspires introspection, and makes the best pandan waffles anyone could ever dream of. Our conversation is both a meditation and exploration. We talk about the importance of being in deep relationship with place, community, and one another across time and space, and taking the long view when framing how we approach our work. Bao and I have long said that our conversations are podcast worthy, and now you get the opportunity to listen in. I'm so excited to be here today with my very, very dear friend, Bao Nguyen, who is just been like the light of my life for years and years now. And we were always destined to do a podcast episode together, I think just because of the nature of every single one of our conversations is podcast worthy in one way or another. And so this is just fate, really and truly. So Bao was born in Saigon, Vietnam, and immigrated to the U.S. in the mid-90s. He grew up in the White Center neighborhood of South Seattle with his family. And while attending the University of Washington for a bachelor's degree in chemistry, he fatefully stumbled into various jobs with local nonprofits, where he learned about community building, social justice, and leadership. He went on to open Phin, a Vietnamese coffee shop in Seattle's Little Saigon area, where he currently works practicing and exploring at the intersection of entrepreneurship, social change, spirituality, and his Vietnamese identity. So I'm going to hand it over to you to just, fill in some of those gaps and share a little bit about your background and how you arrived to today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erin, for having me here. I mean, just like you said, I think I'm channeling a lot of our previous conversations where, we started out really just checking in with each other, but, really ended up having such wild tangents, like you described them. And I've always, left those conversations feeling more curious and more, excited to explore. So I'm just happy to do this with you and have it be recorded and shared with other folks. And hopefully some of that energy gets, transferred across the sound waves too. Yeah, about myself. I mean, it's kind of curious because, me, I love stories, I love telling stories and hearing stories. And yet, as I was kind of thinking about my story for this podcast, yeah, like it just feels very hazy. And I think probably because as I get older and reflect more on my life, it feels like the only right answer to that is that I'm here because of a series of fortunate events and coincidence. There's really no other way to describe it. I do want to zoom in on the fact that I am a Vietnamese immigrant, right? And I think because one, I want to kind of note the impact of U.S. imperialism and European colonialism on my life. And it's an identity that I feel like I have in common with a large but distinct group of people, I guess. And, kind of helps put my life in some context. Like in the bio, it basically says I was born in Vietnam and then I came to the U.S. And so, there's a whole complicated reason and history of why that was possible or why that happened. Right. And, as a Vietnamese immigrant in the U.S., I feel like I grew up, in a certain path, that more or less was determined. Now every immigrant individual has, their own, journey to explore, but I think we can all share some commonalities in the way that we see ourselves, vis-a-vis the U.S., the U.S. American society. So, yeah. And what that means to me is that I, ended up feeling quite lost and confused going through the US education system. And that's why I ended up with a bachelor in chemistry. And that was, there wasn't a whole lot of intentionality there. It was not a decision that I made for myself. And I think it kind of speaks to a sense of being, kind of torn apart from this wholeness of myself. And so I remember graduating from UW with a bachelor and not feeling very happy about it. And in fact, it was probably one of the lowest moments of my life because I had barely eked by. I had terrible GPA. Uh, all of the higher level classes, I just really struggled through because there was no sense of purpose there. Like I had no idea what I was doing, what I was learning. Well, I wasn't really learning anything because I was not present at all. Yeah. So when I finished, my bachelor degree, I was just like, what the fuck am I doing now? What the fuck do I do now? I can't do anything with a bachelor in chemistry, a terrible GPA, which would have excluded me from any opportunities of higher ed, right? Uh, and probably the best I could have done in that field was a lab tech. And not to disparage any lab techs out there, but I also felt like it wasn't my calling. But fortunately, as you mentioned, I had found a job while in college working for an after school drop-in program for the youth in my community of White Center, a low income black and brown neighborhood of Seattle where a lot of Vietnamese immigrants end up. It was there that I learned about poverty. It was there that I learned about social injustice because it was the only after school program, free after school program. And it was provided by the county because the school district didn't have a lot of resources to provide these after school programs for the kids. And so the county had to do it. And that really kind of kickstarted my journey into questioning why resources are distributed the way that they are. And from there, I just found other jobs in kind of the same sector of community building, of social justice. And finally, after a few years doing that, I ended up at an organization called iLeap, where I met a very wonderful executive director who became my boss and mentor.
So we met when we were both in a master's program at the University of Vermont. We were both in transitional phases of our lives without actually, I think, knowing it. Only in retrospect did we know that. And I would like look back at that time and say that it was the thing that for me kind of kickstarted the path that I'm currently on, because our program was at Leadership for Sustainability, which I think is just such a like doesn't even remotely like encapsulate like the depth of that program. But that was where I already had like a basis of social justice and kind of like an understanding of systems of oppression, and that is where I started to understand that with a lot more, like understand the complexity a lot more and understand my role in actually addressing that. And at any rate, that was just my relationship with you, my relationship with other folks in that program, like were the reasons why I was able to love myself enough to like get divorced, was to like shift the focus of my business, to do all of these different things. And I think there was so much power in that at that time in our lives. And I'd love to hear you share just, what that also meant to you.
Yeah, do you remember the night we officially met and actually exchanged words?
Of course I do. I don't feel like that's my story to tell.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to recall that. And I do remember that night very vividly. I feel like, a lot of my friendships can't really tell the beginning of where it all started. But I feel like with you, I have a very clear, like, start to this relationship, this friendship here. And yeah, I remember that night very vividly. It was just you, me, and Karen in that cabin by Lake Champlain. Everyone else had gone to sleep, I believe. And Karen and I, we started talking early that day about our Asian American identity and being one of the very few people of color in that program. And Karen had asked me that night, right, yeah, what would I have done if I had shown up to this program of 16 people and I was the only person of color? Yeah. And I remember saying to her that I would have left. And I think that says a lot, right, about where I was in my development as a leader and in my comfort with the social dynamics and the race dynamics of this country. And partly because I grew up in White Center, like I mentioned, a predominantly Black and brown community neighborhood. So all of my schooling experience had also allowed me to not interact, not engage with white people. So when I got to, and even all through my career up to that point, I had worked only for organizations that were run by people of color. So when I came to that to the Mises program and that retreat specifically, and saw for finally felt like a minority very viscerally. That was my flight, mechanism was, I want to get out of here. I don't know. And part of it was we were expected, right, to show up quite vulnerable, to share, to be quite intimate with each other. And I had no idea how to do that with white people. That was what I was feeling. And I think that was the first night or no, or the second night of the start of the program. I'm very glad I stayed. I'm very glad that Karen was there as well to keep me grounded and keep me in the program. Forever grateful for her. And I remember because I also, your presence in that room, in that conversation, I was aware of it, but it also felt unintrusive, and I felt like you also held that space for us in some ways, witnessed that conversation and witnessed what I had to say. And so I appreciate you being there as well. And I think that really helped. That really got our friendship to a great start.
And I remember sitting there and I think I was like coloring and just I felt like such a tremendous honor to be in that space with both of you and to bear witness to the conversation. And also, I think so many white people want to like insert themselves into those conversations. And I was like, that's not my place to do that. And then at some point I just kind of got up and went to bed and then the next day I think is when you and I had a conversation about it because you were like, what was that like for you? I like breakfast the next morning and I was like,
Like, ooh.
All right, let's talk about it. Like so and then it just all went from there. But it was such a important part of the program for me too. Was just that night and being able to be there in that space with you both and just to be able to to bear witness was like a whole thing. Like we don't get to do that like very often, I think, without defensiveness, without all of those different things coming to play. I felt incredibly lucky and honored to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think it was the first time I'd just been open and vulnerable in front of a white person. Just gave me that opportunity to start practicing. So thank you for that. And for me, yeah, that program, the rest of the program was just transformative. And it's like you mentioned, it was definitely a transitional moment in my life where I had just started to feel what I think I call now a sense of calling, of what I'm supposed to be doing in this life. And I think what the program meant to me was just how we want to show up in this world at this time with all that we hold in ourselves, in our bodies, whatever that might look like for us. And it took me quite a while to finish that program, but I'm so very glad that I did. And, I think Finn, where I'm at right now is the culmination of that. And certainly not the final product, but certainly, but it is a chapter that continues from there.
I think that it's just so beautiful that this coffee shop is a way that you get to explore your like leadership and express your leadership in the world, because I don't think a lot of people would be like automatically like, yeah, coffee shop is totally like related to leadership, which is related to, and then the piece around slowing down, which we haven't talked about yet, but like caffeine is oftentimes not associated with slowing down. But these are the things that you've created this unique, beautiful space to allow that kind of the deep work that we need to do as a society becomes possible through the space that you've created. So talk to me a little bit just about Finn and about the partnerships and about just all of the ways in which it like this you are so much a part of that business while also maintaining your own boundaries and not becoming the business, which I think is another really important point. But I want to hear about how that, I mean, I know the story, but other people don't. Of like
You were
what
very
you
much
were
part of the story. Yeah.
but what were you calling forth when you decided to start Finn?
Yeah. Coming out of the master's program, what I was looking to do at that time was to kind of find a space to start playing, start exploring, start having fun. What we took away from the program was a set of tools and kind of a new way of exploring, new ways of exploring, new ways of knowing, new ways of learning. So I was very kind of excited and anxious to start doing some of those things, applying some of the things that we've been so fortunate to learn. Lots of us have gone on to do many different things, and I was at that time didn't have a concrete job, so to speak. And now a lot of us have this dream of having a coffee shop. Now that one thing that I've learned from the last couple of years of being here at the coffee shop is that a lot of people think about having a coffee shop as their kind of daydream. And I was no different. In fact, my parents in Vietnam had run a small coffee shop as well for a short while. And so I remember I was young then, but I remember some memories of coming there, being dropped off there after school and just hanging out and, watching my mom and my aunts, work. And so that seed had already been planted in me. It's just been dormant for so many years until 2019 when my partner and I were driving around one night and we were like, man, we really wanted a space to just sit and hang out. And I remember what we were looking for was a Vietnamese coffee shop. And what I mean by that is that coffee shops in Vietnam have traditionally been spaces of relaxation, of socialization, and actually a lot of it has been about spaces of reflection. You mentioned that coffee is often seen as a, accelerant of life, energy giving and productivity and all that. But that's typically an American view of coffee. The coffee culture that I grew up in Vietnam was kind of the opposite. People saw coffee as an opportunity to pause. They saw coffee as an opportunity to build relationships, to just sit and think and observe. And oftentimes, people hung out at coffee shops and would spend literally hours just sipping on one drink, whether it be with a friend, with friends, or by themselves. And so that was what we were missing. That was exactly what we wanted. And at that time, that kind of space was non-existent where in Seattle. And so that's kind of where the idea started for us. And we were fortunate enough to have the resources to even think about building a business. Such a privilege even be in a position, that kind of position. So after talking about this for a while longer, we were happening to be driving around Little Saigon, the economic and cultural hub of Seattle, for the Vietnamese community in Seattle here, where we unsurprisingly spent a lot of time. We saw this space. It was, in a new development, an apartment building, but with retail space. And we saw that the retail space was available and immediately caught our eye. I mean, I knew that I wanted a space in Little Saigon. Again, just for us, it feels like a second home. We had spent so much time here and had built a lot of relationships in this neighborhood that when it came time to open a business, it just made sense to be here. And so when we saw a space that was perfect size, it was something that we can manage, that was when the idea really became solid, and we started put things in motion to do this. That was when I approached you to help me kind of visualize this, and also very importantly, to build a sound business plan out of these wild ideas. And yeah, I mentioned to you in the beginning, before we started talking about this, was how important it was for me to show up to this community with care and reciprocity. I wanted the coffee shop to make this community stronger, make it more vibrant, and to do it in a way that feels authentic to me.
And it was an experiment in a lot of ways, I think, too, in, how do you bring these values of heart centered entrepreneurship? How do you showcase your culture, too? And doing this all in, like, arguably the coffee capital of the United States.
Yeah,
you When you told
yeah,
me you were like, I want to open a coffee shop in Seattle, I was like, okay, we can do this. There's
right.
no shortage of coffee there.
There's no shortage of coffee here. And also it's in a way, because of where Seattle is in relation to the coffee industry, that it also made it more intimidating, right? Because it feels like folks here are very coffee savvy, and not only that, but also kind of very specific in their enjoyment of coffee. And so we were going to do something quite different. But one of the core values of the coffee shop that I wanted to bring was this kind of the relationship building part of it. In business, especially in coffee, we have to talk about customer relationship. That's a very, basic concept in building a business. But I wanted to go further than that. I wanted to pay attention to the quality of those relationships. And I wanted them to create the conditions for them to develop further, to develop deeper than a mere kind of customer relationship. I wanted to allow space for them to grow into something more. And so that was, a very intentional design, and something that I think is very complex, because it's very unpredictable, the way that we built this space, so that for relationships to happen. So far, it's been really exciting, really fun to see how some of these relationships have come out. Earlier this year, we collaborated with a few folks that I had met through the coffee shop to do an event at the Wing Luke Museum here in Seattle. That event was called Tương Lai, which means future in Vietnamese. I had met Duan, who's a staff member at the museum. I had met Oliver V, who's a trans Vietnamese photographer, and I had met a couple of fashion designers, Tân and Nguyen, who co-own the souvenir kind of fashion brand. And through several conversations, we ended up finding a lot of common grounds and questions. And so we had decided to work together to, to explore these questions around our Vietnamese identity. That culminated in a community event where we got to hold space for conversations and also to express ourselves creatively. There was art involved. There was just a lot of love and beauty that came out of it. And then after the event ended, a few months later, I get an email from the president of the Vietnamese Student Association at Seattle University here, who had attended the event and was so touched by it that they asked us, Finn, to come share our story to their student group. And so, in the way, another relationship had just developed because of this. It's just been really fun and deeply rewarding to have these relationships now, to have these relationships develop and grow into something more.
I think this, like, the concept of relationship building community goes hand in hand with justice too. And so I'm really interested to hear how justice and community and like how all of those things are showing up in the coffee shop. Like what is the role of place in your work, and how does that tie into your values as a person and as a shopkeeper?
When we were talking about a place to put Finn, Little Saigon was the only neighborhood where we saw that as a possibility because this neighborhood saved us. And so I don't often tell this story, but when my family first immigrated to the US, we didn't go straight to Seattle. We actually landed in Manchester, New Hampshire, place where I'm sure you're much more familiar with than a lot of a lot of folks. But we ended up there because our sponsor family was there. And back in 1995, Manchester was very white. I don't know how it is now, but was very white. And in May, it was still quite cold for a family from tropical Vietnam. And I remember my mom just crying every night because it was so lonely and so cold, literally and figuratively, right? And at that time, there was no easy communication with across the globe. After 1 month, that was it. Like we couldn't handle it anymore, and my parents knew some folks in Seattle, and they told us to come there, to come here. And just after a month of our immigrant life, we packed everything up, and because we had no money, we took the Greyhound bus from New Hampshire to Seattle. And so that was a whole nother journey of, 4 days and probably 4 nights or something like that. And we came to Seattle because there was a Vietnamese community here. And there was a little Saigon here. There was a Chinatown here. And immediately it made our lives bearable. And it gave us a solid place to start building a new life. So, when it came time for us to think about building a business, this was our thank you, our act of reciprocity to a neighborhood, to a community that, like I mentioned, helped save us. And Little Saigon right now is going through a lot of change. It's a 40, 50-year-old community. And so a lot of the buildings, a lot of the businesses are due for change, due for redevelopment. But that also comes with a lot of uncertainty about its future. And as you probably know, small businesses are the identity of the neighborhood, because they stay around. They bring people to the neighborhood. And what kind of small businesses or cluster of small businesses really defines a neighborhood, a community. We chose to be in Little Saigon because of that. We wanted to contribute to the preservation and continuation of, its namesake. So that's why this place is important to us. why we chose to be here is, has a lot to do with our history and our vision and our wish for this community.
And one of the things we had talked about as we were putting together your business plan is like, how do you give back to that community? And I mean, in so many ways, you're doing that. You're giving back, just through the partnerships that you have. The fact that Wing Luke Museum is right around the corner, which I like super duper love. But you also have right around the other side is, this encampment, of houseless folks. And I know it was important for you to think about like what is Finn's role in being part of that community as well.
Right. They are part of our community. They're not vagrants. They are not migrants. They are people who are part of this community. I did study social justice. We did learn about that a lot. But the more I grow and the more I look into justice, the less I know what it means. The more fuzzy it gets. But I guess what how I've learned to approach justice is through the lens of compassion, something that I feel much more equipped to think about and to practice. How like in the kind of the Western symbol of justice is Lady Justice, right? This woman figure with holding a scale and with a blindfold, and in the other hand is a sword. And I'm like, what kind of justice is a blind person waving a sword dealing out? I don't know if I want to be anywhere near that. I don't want my justice to be blind here. I kind of want a compassionate justice. I want justice that sees us as human beings, justice that sees us as people who are imperfect, that suffer. And, my concept of compassion is really deeply rooted in the Buddhist tradition that I grew up in. And this is kind of interesting too, in the way that it translates and how much gets lost or twisted, because in Vietnamese, compassion is to be, which means to remove or erase suffering. And you don't really get a sense of that in the word compassion. I don't know, you break down the etymology of the word compassion, I don't feel like it's the same. But for us in the Buddhist tradition, compassion is an act of removing or relieving, alleviating suffering from others and from ourselves ultimately. And so with Finn, it was very important that I practice, that I bring that practice of compassion into this work. Part of that practice is to leave room, to do the hard human things. It's easy for us to practice compassion with a friend or a customer who comes in and orders and stays quiet. Like you don't get brownie points for being nice to somebody who's being nice to you. I mean, it's obviously it's pleasant, but the practice is when an unhoused person comes and asks for water or asks to use the bathroom or sits down at our outside table and start using, whatever. That's the hard practice of compassion. And I, wanted to leave room for those instances. And I do that by, there are many businesses here that will put up a sign that says no public bathroom. There is even a Seattle Police Department program where you can preemptively allow police officers to remove folks from your doorsteps by, signing up for the program, and that kind of gives them permission to come. So we do neither of those things, and because I feel like that's not justice, and that's not a compassionate thing to do. It certainly leads to unpleasant interactions, but I feel like those are the real challenge, the real opportunities to practice compassion and empathy. And and actually, I feel like it overall it makes this coffee shop a space that receives and holds like people as whole human beings, and not simply as opportunities for business and transactions by not having those signs up. I feel like it signifies this space as something different.
Yeah, I think that it would be so much better if, like, in our capitalistic society, that we could actually shift to more relational ways of being versus transactional. And I mean, I think it's one of those things like I encounter so much in my work is like, how do we, how do we move beyond that? Because it's not swimming in this culture. We're so conditioned to just be like, yep, that transaction's done and we move on from there. It's like the emphasis on the bottom line. It's the emphasis on, all of those things that we have to step forward first with profit versus people, planet, any of those other things. And I
Yeah,
think there
and
yeah.
it's well, I just wanted to just a little tangent. It's like, can you imagine? I mean, actually, I think I don't know any specific places, but I feel like there are places that would put up a Black Lives Matter sign, a rainbow flag, and still no public restroom. And I feel like that, you know, feels very problematic in some ways, right? That you're honoring certain values, but then upholding other that contradictory values.
I feel like I can't remember if it was you I talked to about this, but there was somebody who was telling me a story about, like, a barbershop in their community that had a Black Lives Matter sign. And somebody walked in and was like, "Oh, well, do you know how to actually cut black hair, style black hair?" And they were like, "No." And it's like, "Oh, okay." Like, okay. Just that performative aspect of
Right,
things is so
right,
so
right.
real.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like when I start looking up for these signs now, like
You're just gonna troll all the businesses in Seattle.
no, but I won't. But I'll definitely keep a personal log.
Yep. You are one of my favorite change makers in the world, obviously. And I also have such an interesting feeling about that term. But what I want to say is, like, so for you, what does it mean to actually give a damn? And I think one of the things we've talked about before is that this idea of giving a damn can cross physical and temporal boundaries. And that's like such a sexy way of, I think, describing that. And so I'd love you to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we're crossing physical and time barriers here, and I don't mean that in like a new age metaphysical kind of way either. I really wanted to make this concrete because one of the most influential essays I've read in recent years has been this piece by Dr. Wayne Yang, an ethnic studies professor at UC San Diego, who wrote about a concept called deep organizing. And well, in the way that he describes it is like, how when we talk about organizing currently, it kind of typically is centered around political organizing, for political gains, for organizing against established power or to attain power. But how Dr. Yang defines deep organizing is that it goes, kind of the name would imply, deeper than that. It is organizing vitally. And what that means for him is that to figure out ways of being, ways of relating, so that our lives, our collective life, can continue intergenerationally. For me, the word intergenerationally is really interesting in this concept because when we think about the word generationally, we often think about it going forward. But I think he uses the word intergenerationally to mean that we also look back and honor the gifts from past generations. So, and use those gifts so that to make life, a reality for future ones. And so when I read that piece, it was just jaw dropping for a couple of reasons. One, it was super interesting. And two, it also felt very familiar, like something I've already been doing, something that the space that I've already been kind of playing in. It just kind of now has a nice framework for me to start thinking about it some more. Right. And so So this is the framework that I've been playing around a lot in thinking about how we create change. That the framework for me to think about change making in that in seeing myself as part of a long timeline where I'm in the middle of this timeline and then extends back, you know, thousands and millions of years, and it extends forward thousands and millions of years. And not just time, but how our impact can, be felt not only across this globe, but across the solar system, across the universe. And it's freeing, and it's very freeing in a way because, in looking at change this way, there's no final product. There's no final achievement. Another person that I really look up to is Grace Lee Boggs. And she, at the end of toward the end of her life, she was still fighting. She was still a revolutionary. She was still like lit. And, I think, folks asked her like what keeps her going after all these years. And the way that she answered that was that she said, it's the realization that there is no final struggle. Whether you win or lose, each struggles bring forth new questions, new contradictions, new opportunities to explore. And so when we expand our change making boundaries in this way, across physical and temporal boundaries, it becomes the freeing part for me comes from knowing that it is a forever journey. So I don't tie my work toward any kind of utopic vision. Um, and and I feel like that attachment is what's causing a lot of the burnout that we talk about in the social change arena. Is folks keep working and working and working, and then never seeing, and not only not seeing the change, but seeing things get worse when they look outside. And it can be very demoralizing. But in the framework of deep organizing, you are organizing for change that you might not see in this lifetime. And so how do we plan for that? How do you show up today so that your impact is still positive, not only 7 generations later, but 700 generations later? Yeah, it's a question that I find a lot of joy in thinking about.
Well, that's fucking amazing. Just gave me chills. This is like totally dorky, but I've been rewatching all of the Star Wars shows, all the new ones, all the old ones. I just got to New Hope, which is the first of the original trilogy. And having watched all of everything that preceded that, it makes me think about the fact, that, because there are generations that are fighting as part of that rebellion. And, and we know that it continues on into the future, because there's more movies, there's more series. It makes me think about how a lot of the work that we are doing, that the struggle is universal in a lot of ways, and that it's like you're saying, it's not a utopic kind of vision that we're working towards, but it is this idea that we are ever inching our way towards a better future for future generations, slowly but surely. And some of the only things that we do have control over are the ways in which we show up to that work. I don't know if that's profound or idiotic, but but there was just like, there's
It
like
can be
there's
both.
like where can we there we go. Yeah. Just that it is okay for us to also recognize our own limitations. And truly to be sustainable in the struggle is to take care of ourselves and those around us.
Yeah, Grace Lee Boggs has another really cool quote around that, is that we don't pick the times that we live in, but we can choose how we show up in it and how we think about it. we talked about a little bit about hope, and it I have a fraught relationship with hope, because when I look outside and read the news, it feels very, I don't want to say hopeless, but not very hopeful either. And yet, I think I said to you before that not a lot of things bring me hope, but I also feel hopeful because of these conversations, um, because there is a response to the things that are happening in the world, the unjust things, the things that is causing more harm and suffering. There is a response to that, and this is one of these conversations is one of those response, and it brings me a lot of joy to be part of it, to be part of the response as well. And so I feel more hopeful after having this conversation with you. And actually, after every conversation with you, I feel more hopeful. And so there's my updated answer to that the question around hope.
I feel the same way. I feel like I created this podcast literally to help me feel less hopeless in the moment, and in a way to recommit to the work that I do. Because like we were talking about, it is hard to do this work, and when we try to do this work in a vacuum without others around us, there's no other option, I think, but to burn out. I recommit over and over to community when I do this work, and to others that are in my life. And I'm just so grateful and honored that you chose to have this conversation with me today, because anytime we get an opportunity to talk to one another, it like touches my soul in a way that nothing else does. And God damn it, I love you so much. Like, I can't wait for like more generations, like for us to like continue out this generation and and just to see what the next couple decades will bring us, because being in relationship with one another over space and time, what a beautiful way to kind of experience life.
Yeah, the love is reciprocal, as we say in the program, right? More than ever now. I think Adrienne Marie Brown says this, but I think she's like, she said it's not so much about critical mass anymore, and critical relationships that are generative, and relationships that are change making, that are impactful. And so I feel like, yeah, critical relationships are, yeah. And I think we're both doing similar work in the sense of making space for critical relationships to happen. Me with Finn, the coffee shop here, and you with this podcast, and the conversations you're having is, I feel like, toward critical relationships. And I feel like we already have one, but it gets deeper and more exciting and more vibrant every time we talk. And so I'm very happy to be here and be with you
And I'm excited
across time and across space.
And I think that there's ripple effects that'll come from these conversations and from the critical relationship that we have too. Again, I'm just so grateful for your time, for your energy, just honored to know you. And I love you so much. And this will probably not be the last time that we have a conversation on the podcast. I bet we'll be having more of these. But thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you to Bao Nguyen for joining me in conversation today. If you want to learn more about his work, you can check out finseattle.com or follow them on Instagram. Check the show notes for links. If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave a 5-star rating and review to help us reach more people. Make sure to follow Rise and Rouse wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss your chance to hear from someone who gives a damn. Follow us on Instagram at Rise and Rouse, and sign up for my newsletter by going to allgoodstrategies.com. Rise and Rouse is created and hosted by me, Erin Allgood. It is produced and edited by Steph George of Stefania Audio. Production support from Grace Cleary-Morin and Jana Krizanova. Our theme music is written and produced by Chris Marion.